Hi, welcome to our talk about shiitake mushroom right here. I'm Maggie O'Halloran. We are in our backyard in Central Florida, the home of the Florida School of Holistic Living here in Orlando. I am one of the educators at the Florida School of Holistic Living. We have a variety of classes, but our goal really is to inspire you to spend more time with plants. So today we are in my backyard in Central Florida talking about shiitake mushroom, and we will talk about some of the growing ideas, very little today, a little bit about how it's used, how it's been historically used, and how I use it today. So welcome. Let's start with thinking about what is shiitake. So shiitake is right here. We have the above ground fruiting body of shiitake. There are lots of different mushrooms out there you're all probably really familiar with. Button mushrooms have been in salad bars as long as I can remember. Today we're really going to be focused on shiitake mushroom, but many of the things that I'm saying about this mushroom apply to all those other mushrooms. Make sure to comment questions, thoughts, if you're growing mushrooms. And this is just the above ground fruiting body. This is the part most of us are really familiar with when we're talking about mushrooms, is the part that is actually the fruit. The rest of the mushroom, a large percentage of that mushroom, is happening under the ground, in the logs, below the ground. Our plant populations use that mycelium network. That's the rest of the mushroom, that mycelium network, to communicate about pathogens or bugs or things that are coming their way. So mushrooms are a really important part of our garden ecosystem. If you want to get really into growing and thinking about how you can incorporate mushrooms into your garden, make sure to check out a different video by our friend Terry Meir. He spent a whole 20 minutes talking about some of the basics of growing mushrooms. If you want a book reference, one that I have comes from this book, Gaia's Garden. And this book is really dedicated to the idea of permaculture. And permaculture is basically a way of saying permanent agriculture. It's a way of growing and harvesting food and participating with the environment in which you live. In this book, there is a reference to the value and the benefits of having mushrooms growing in your backyard. There's a quote here by well-known mushroom genius Paul Stamets of fungi.com, and his book is called Mycelium Running. I don't have it here today, but Gaia's Garden, which we're looking at now, mentions it. And in this book, there's a mention of how important that mycelium network can be, both for reclaiming land. There's micro remediation, where if there's been a site that maybe has had a lot of petroleum or other chemicals involved in the soil, you can incorporate mushrooms into your plan to reclaim that land for growing food. So basically you would inoculate it with mushroom spores, you'd harvest those mushrooms, and you would dispose of them in any way that you would dispose of other things that might have things like lead in them. So the mushrooms are really good at bringing those potential toxins out of the soil and making it more hospitable for growing other things. Again, a couple of resources on learning about growing. If you're local here to Central Florida, John Martin is someone that we seek out locally here in Orlando, as well as Caitlin Fogarty. And both of those folks you can find in all of the social media places. They offer classes, and John actually grows mushrooms. So if you live locally, you'd be able to have access to those mushrooms that are grown locally. Otherwise, check out Paul Stamets at fungi.com. And if you have a nice, damp growing environment like we do here in Central Florida, mushrooms grow really well. I just happen to not grow the mushroom that we're talking about today, Shiitake mushroom. So we've talked a little bit about this wonderful mycelium. Now, the part that we are incorporating into our lives are where most of us are consuming them in food most of the time. So when we're thinking about food, the energetic of this is considered neutral, sometimes considered cooling. I have a book here I'll drop in the comments. It's called Healing with Whole Foods by Paul Pitchford, and he talks in depth about using mushrooms in food and how you can incorporate them into your lives for their health benefits. How I use mushrooms in my kitchen. I think about their health benefits. They are immune enhancing. So there's a plant constituent in mushrooms that allows your body to modulate your immune system. So in times when maybe there's a lot of stress or you've been exposed to a lot of different things and you just need your immune system to be powered up and fed and nourished, mushrooms can be a really great resource in your life. If you want to get more into the specifics and the specific health imbalances of working with mushrooms, check out Paul Stamets. He has lots of well thought out and planned and outlaid information on working with mushrooms to better your health. And don't take anything in this video above and beyond talking to your healthcare provider. So make sure you're thinking of that. And a lot of the work that I do in my kitchen and the health is for the health of me and my family and nourishing us and making sure that we're all healthy. So once you have those mushrooms, I use them in a lot of different ways. It's generally considered a good idea not to wash them. Whenever you wash them, they absorb a lot of water. So you might be thinking, well, my mushrooms show up with dirt on them, and I say knock off the dirt and then cut the tips. Brian, you mind coming in a little closer, please? So we're gonna be down here. So I just cut the tip off if it's dirty. If it's not, then you can incorporate it into your meal. The stems grow a little bit, or cook a little bit tougher. So if I'm throwing this into soups or stews, I would just leave the stem on and be okay. But I often saute this. And so I find it's easier to cut if I'm cutting on the underside of that mushroom. The top side can be pretty leathery and harder to navigate. I add some type of oil to my pan. Olive oil, butter is really nice. And I let those simmer for just a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes in that pan, stirring really nicely because I want to make sure I'm cooking my mushrooms. I know that we've seen mushrooms in that salad bar for ages and ages, but really those plant constituents that make that mushroom beneficial to your immune system are best accessed whenever you cook them. And there's some data out there that's saying that if it's not cooked, it can actually be harmful. So make sure you cook those mushrooms, and sauteing them a little bit will help will cook it up for you. I said cut the stems off, and look at me, I'm leaving them in there. Mushrooms are in their own category. They're not in the plant kingdom. They're not really in the animal kingdom, though some scientists say they're more closely related to the animal kingdom than the plant kingdom, which I think is pretty fascinating. When I am working with mushrooms, I also occasionally leave them outside, just in this bowl. I left it outside for a few minutes, and research has let me know that it's actually a way for me to get vitamin D into my body, is to leave this out in the sun for 15 minutes to 2 hours, depending on where you're reading. Vitamin D in the body is also a wonderful way to help our immune system stay strong and high performing. And vitamin D is really like a hormone in the body. It's something that our body produces on the skin, and many of us either don't have access to enough sun to get adequate amounts of vitamin D in our body, or we live in the air conditioning, which cools the body and makes the vitamin D production on the skin stop. So whenever I'm cooking, I'm chopping those up, I have them in a little bit of oil, and then I would stir them up in the pan. And I often, because I live in a household of people who would rather not eat mushrooms in this way, I would take them out and I'd put them in a container, and then I'd add them to my food throughout the week. There are two other ways. So this was fresh. You can also have access to mushrooms in their dried state. So here I have dried shiitake mushrooms. These can be really wonderful to have on hand. I can keep them in my cabinet. They're shelf stable. They don't have to be in the refrigerator. I don't need to worry about molds or things like that or going bad in the refrigerator. I can just leave them in my cabinet. And then when it's time to make a soup, a stew, a veggie stock, or a chicken stock if you're into that, I can throw in some of these mushrooms, and I'm adding that immune modulating aspect to my stock. If I wanted to incorporate them into a dish that's more of a saute, I can rehydrate these. I can just add hot water to this jar and let it sit for 20 minutes, and those mushrooms would rehydrate. They'd be really watery. I'd want to be really mindful that I couldn't just chop them up and throw them onto a sandwich at that point, but they would be really fantastic in sautés that way. Or what I do most of the time from the dried state is I throw them into soups, stews, especially if I'm not feeling well. I can put a pot of nettle infusion on the stove, throw in some of these mushrooms, let it heat up, add a little bit of miso, and drink up and just feel better almost immediately. So nourishing. Another way for you to access mushrooms is to get them in the dried state. And I have four ways I incorporate the dried mushroom into my life. Like I mentioned, I live with folks that really would prefer not to eat mushrooms, especially cooked. There's just a slime factor. So dried, on the savory end, you can put it into shaker mixes like my friend Julianne over at the Garden Jewels has done here. If you want to see her more in the kitchen, check out our on-demand class, Finding Your Inner Kitchen Herbalist. She has wonderful spice blends and mixes. It can be a really fun way to have things like mushroom powders accessible in your life so that you can add them to soups and stir fries and lasagna. Honestly, I put mushroom powders in all the things, anything that I'm cooking, and it just needs a little bit of heat so that you can access that. I also have mushroom powders that are specifically called broth powders, so they have mushrooms in them. Another one of my favorites that we have no affiliation with, it's just one that I incorporate in my life quite a bit, is this brand of mushroom powder that I simply add hot water to. And so it's a powder, and I can add it to hot water, and it is a really lovely substitute for that bitter coffee beverage, hot beverage, if I'm craving that and don't want to have the caffeine. This can be a really nice way. This blend of mushroom powders has shiitake, but it has some of those other mushrooms in it. Maitake, reishi. Reishi is another mushroom that I would never use in cooking like this. It is a mushroom that comes, it's more like a bark in the way that it grows. Our local fungi John has made a reishi hot cocoa. So it is an extract of reishi along with some other herbs like cacao and a little bit of cayenne to make it a little bit of a heated drink as well. It's a really nice way to incorporate those mushrooms into your life. And you could have a sweet hot cocoa beverage or add it to your other hot beverage. I can mix the two to have the cocoa powder as well. You can make these for yourself at home. Powdered mushrooms, you can find at any herb store. I know our local Leaves and Roots carries that. And Gypsy, as well as Mountain Rose Herbs or any other herb distributor that you have contact with. Frontier is another. There are other ways that you can incorporate mushrooms into your life. One is tincture form. So Post Defense is the company started by Paul Stamets, who's the mushroom guy. If you want to know more about using mushrooms in a really deep way, you can find Post Defense mushrooms. Again, no affiliation. I just use these in my life. Ways of accessing those mushrooms. And tinctures are a concentrated herbal extract. So to make a tincture, I would, instead of adding water to my jar of my mushrooms, I would add alcohol. I'd fill it up. I'd probably chop up those mushrooms a little bit, pulse them in my food processor or something a little bit just to have more surface area. But I would add alcohol and let it sit for 4 to 6 weeks. There are lots of ways to make tinctures. One of them is the method of just adding alcohol to the plant material. So that is one step in making a tincture of mushrooms. Now, remember those wonderful immune modulating aspects of the plant materials? The best way to get all of the mushroom qualities that you want into a tincture form, you need to double extract. So the tincture is one extraction method, and then you would also use some of that same plant material in a pot on the stove with water and let it simmer for about 20 minutes. And then you would combine the tincture and the water at the end of that process. If you want to know more about double extraction and working with plants, we have a wonderful series of the Roots of Herbalism program. Next would be the Family Herbalist program, where we go a little deeper. We spend a lot of time in my kitchen at my house thinking about how to incorporate herbs into our lives for our families. And making double extraction. So here I have, this is one I keep on hand, is a double extraction of that reishi mushroom. Reishi is unique in that it also has adaptogen qualities. And adaptogen just means that it helps your body adapt to stress. It's going to help your body get back to homeostasis. If you've been in a stressful experience, it's going to help your body stay healthy and neutral and relieved of the harmful actions that stress can have on the body. For those of you already in our Roots of Herbalism program and you're viewing this as part of that material, I wanted to share one way that you can demonstrate a Materia Medica. Fine, if you wouldn't mind coming in, thank you. So Materia Medica is simply how you present the information on a plant. I know we were talking a lot about Shiitake today. This Materia Medica is about reishi, just a different kind of mushroom than I mentioned in the double extraction, the adaptogen qualities. And this student has done a Materia Medica on the reishi mushroom and has included all of the actions and uses, cautions, preparations, a history of use, and all those things in a document that is very visually supportive to their own way of remembering the information around the plant. So this is one way to do a Materia Medica. Thank you to the student that created this. Thank you for your time. It's been really lovely having you here in my backyard in Central Florida. I look forward to hearing about how you're growing and using mushrooms in the kitchen. There's so many different ways of incorporating mushrooms into your life that can be helpful and beneficial to you and your family. I'm Maggie O'Halloran. Be sure to reach out if you have any questions or thoughts or concerns. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you next time in the garden. Bye now.